Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Legends of Runeterra metagame breakdown. This week we are back with the first Masters only stats. So keep in mind, last week we were looking at all ranks. This week and onward we will go back to looking at the Masters only games. So it will only be the Masters metagame and it will be still the top 5 most played and the top 5 highest win rate decks in Masters. We will see a major shift in metagame and win rates, as I said last time already, as I predicted. And yeah, so before we dive into the data, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below to not miss out on future content. And let me briefly introduce you to today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, one of the leading virtual private network providers out there. A virtual private network keeps your data secure and yourself anonymous while using the internet. NordVPN comes with super fast servers, allows you to unlock your favorite entertainment websites like Netflix. They provide a 30-day money-back guarantee. They also have an included cybersecurity suite, which acts as an ad blocker to boot. They don't lock any of your data, provide a 24/7 customer support, and you can use it on up to 6 simultaneous connections, so one account covers most or all of your electronic devices. And most importantly, they don't have any bandwidth limit, so you can use it non-stop without it getting throttled, which is particularly important for heavy users like us. It also won multiple awards and comes highly recommended by top technology experts. So if you're still surfing online without a VPN, now is the time to change that. Get NordVPN now, 70% off for a 3-year plan, including 1 month extra for free using the code ManuS or the personalized link in the description down below. And now on to today's content. Alright, so first off, in 5th place, most played deck, we have Ezreal variants. This includes Vi and Karma. The most popular version of Ionia Ezreal right now is Vi. Looking at the list, there was not really an Ezreal Karma list that was remotely popular. I think there was one with like 13 games or something, so not remotely a foundation for any kind of analysis. But noteworthy is that this specific list we are looking at here only had a win rate of a bit above 51% over almost 200 games. So that might be a negative indicator for Vi Ezreal over Karma Ezreal, which has been doing well consistently in the past. And if we look at the archetype as a whole has a win rate of 57.6%. So it's reasonable to assume that the majority of that win percentage is coming from Ezreal Karma lists, and the Vi list is pulling it down. Maybe there are different, like better performing Ezreal Vi lists, but this one in particular has not been doing particularly well. So keep that in mind. Also, I think it makes some sense since Vi kind of has more of a like board control beatdown plan. Sure, she has a board control support aspect of just helping Ezreal to control the board and not lose before you can Ezreal them. But Karma seems overall like she adds a bit more. She allows you to free up a whole slot because you basically compound the champion slot and the progress day slot into one card and then have more room for other things, stuff like that. So yeah, take this list once again with a grain of salt, but as usual I can only, as an example list, present you with the most popular list to give you an idea what most people are playing, not what you should be playing. What you should be playing, you to some extent have to figure out yourself, or you can get from some of my deck text. I will try to make sure that I get out more deck text to you guys for various decks in the coming days. But yeah, keep that in mind. We're looking more at what to expect when you face certain decks rather than what list you should play. This is not sort of the main goal of this video series. Anyway, on to the 4th most played deck. 4th most played deck, we have the good old Bannerman midrange. Since the new set, we basically have abandoned any kind of splashing, since to deny are easily replaced with 2 unyielding spirit, which also help against the Shadow Isles, Vengeance, Ruination type decks, where deny was the most important because Ruination can be rough for the deck. We also got some new tools in Grizzled Ranger, Loyal Badger Bear, replacing Protege, and Ranger's Resolve being just a really good cheap trick against a lot of like big combat and damage-based stuff like Veil. The other thing that I want to highlight here is that I'm not 100% sure that Badger Bear is better than Prodigy, so might want to keep that in mind, depending especially on how the metagame looks, and do some testing to see if Badger Bear is actually better than Prodigy. The challenge on Prodigy is really, really good and allows you to do things like attack with Warshafts and Prodigy against an opposing Badger Bear, pulling their Bear, leaving the Prodigy and the Bear as a 2-1 and a 4-1, and getting in with Warshafts, while with Badger Bear and Warshafts you can't really do that because then they eat your Warshafts, so you have to attack with your Badger Bear, so you just trade and don't get any damage in. Stuff like that can matter. And Challenge is just really, really powerful, and especially this version of Demacia is not really a beatdown deck, it's more of a mid-range sort of board advantage deck, and that's where Challenge sort of matters potentially even more, so I'm not 100% sure on that. I could see it go either way. Both are very good cards that add a lot to the deck. So yeah, not too surprised to see this back. There are some variations on this that we'll talk about later down the line, but also what I wanted to highlight, the Ezreal variants that we looked at before make up about 7% of the metagame in Masters, while Bannerman makes up about 80%. Almost the same. It's like the difference between 7 and 8% is almost like debatable to say. It's kind of a rounding thing because they basically kind of like have the same representation. I guess if you count in other Bannerman variants like with a splash, then you probably get a bit higher than 8% even, and Bannerman gets a higher percentage, but these are just like rough estimates. Alright, then we are looking at Weimer or Heimerdinger Vi. It's just basically the good old Ionia Heimerdinger deck that has been good on and off for a long time, basically ever since Josh Utterlayton, aka Runeterra, hit rank 1 EU with his take on it, sort of streamlining the archetype, when before it was a bit more variation within the archetype. And not a whole lot has changed. There are a couple of nice new additions. Vi is a great addition to the deck over Karma. Karma was a bit too dirtly and the deck really didn't need it that much and didn't make that much out of her, while Vi gives the deck another powerful standalone threat in addition to Heimerdinger that also helps to control the board and the pace of the game. Claws of the Dragon is a neat new addition. The deck isn't very good to support Eye of the Dragon, but Claws of the Dragon is a nice tempo option that sort of replaced Chempunk Pickpocket. To be fair, there's still a world where it could be wrong to play Claws of the Dragon over Chempunk, but it's certainly close, and they both have their upsides. Otherwise, we don't have a lot of difference here. Basically what we got is Deep Meditation as the one major new card. It basically replaced from the old lists like the Spirit's Refuge, a Deny, and one of the health potions, while the second health potion became the third, or rather the sixth champion, because the old lists usually only ran 5 champions. But that's all the changes really, and the deck is currently going really strong in Masters. It makes up about 13% of the Masters metagame, so that makes sense. We'll have to see how sort of stable the deck will be, how long it will remain one of the top decks. Currently it's also among the best performing decks. We'll see that in a moment. But like in the past, the deck has kind of fallen out of favor reasonably much in some spot. So it might very well happen again, but for now it's kind of like the hot kid on the block in a way. But I'm not sure if it's meant to last. The deck isn't perfect and has had its weaknesses in the past, and I don't think they have been majorly fixed with the new cards. It just got some nice upgrades, but structurally it's still like very much the same decks with mostly the same strengths and weaknesses, I would say. So we'll see how it will perform. Like for example, Bannerman type stuff seems like it should be on the rougher side. Sure, it's not like it's a terrible matchup and you can't beat them, but it's probably something where you're kind of struggling and like playing from behind, and you really need your Heimerdinger and really need your Heimerdinger to live against their single combats to take over the game and stuff like that. So it's gonna be interesting how the deck will stabilize in the coming weeks. Next off, we have the Corina Control or Corina Vi Elise Control. It's basically the old Corina Control, which just got a second champion finally. Before it never really had one. Vi is a great addition to the deck. So there are 3 Vi's, basically at the cost of 1 Frenzied Skitterer, 1 Ruination, and I think 1 or other slot. I think, yeah, there was usually a one-off slot left. To fit the Vi's from like the traditional lists before, and the Get Excited's got swapped for Gotcher because the deck doesn't have like card draw, so investing 2 cards to kill something with Get Excited, pretty costly. Sure, sometimes it was nice to just finish off people with Get Excited, so that is lost, but it makes the deck overall much more consistent and better at grinding people and dealing with stuff without running out of cards, so that's nice. So other than that, it's still the same deck, not too surprised. It's a powerful formula, it has great cards, it got a couple of nice upgrades to help its mid-game and interaction, so yeah, this is here to stay, and I expect it to stay at the top long term within the like top 5 most played and possibly also top 5 highest win rate decks for the foreseeable future, since it has consistently been around since it really put itself on the map, and it just doesn't have a lot of super strong pronounced weaknesses, so it's just a very well-rounded deck. Although right now it is struggling against the Vi Heimerdinger decks, which are kind of keeping it in check. So that's one of the, from what I heard, better decks against it. I haven't played the matchup myself. And last but not least, we have Burn in first place, most popular deck by far, 3,711 games. Overall, 22% of the metagame. By the way, the Corina deck is around 17% of the metagame, according to Cosmic. He compiled some numbers, percentages on the data. Check him out on Twitter at Cosmic Plays if you want to look at his graphs that he made with the data. It's some additional nice info to look at. Alright, so this list a lot better. This is basically the good burn list. Still not a big fan of 3 Static Shock. I think the card's pretty clunky, and I think anything less than 2 transfusions is unacceptable to me with Crimson, with how good it is with Crimson Disciple, and just very solid against opposing like stat-based removal, where transfusion then can stop at mid-combat to make the unit deal damage and deal 2 damage from transfusion. In a lot of cases dealing like 4 or 5 damage, where otherwise you would deal 0. Or just dealing 2 damage with a Disciple and pumping an unblocked unit to deal 4 damage for 2 mana, which is just great. So I would at very least cut a Static Shock for a transfusion, probably 2 Static Shocks for 2 transfusions, and then either keep the Static Shock or turn it into a Blade's Edge or 1-drop if you don't like the Static Shocks at all. I'm a bit undecided on that, but other than that, this is the way Burn should look and is looking, and you know it from my deck tech as well. So we are past the horrible deck lists from the early days, so that is good. That the deck is popular, and the most popular list is a very reasonable one, which is like very minor gripes on my part, basically. I'm trying to look at the percentage, although to be fair, the win rate of this list is only like 55%, and the win rate of the archetype as a whole is 56.5, so slightly higher. It might just be variance because the discrepancy is very small. Could also be that the Static Shocks are a bit too clunky and it's a bit too many, and that the deck might perform a little bit better if it's a bit smoother and more efficient, like lower curve, like chopping down some of those clunky low impact 4-cost cards for like something like more transfusions. But either way, the percentage is close between the overall archetype and this list. And this specific list makes up 750 games of the 3,700. So a little less than a quarter, or around a quarter of the total games. Alright, this concludes the top 5 most played decks. We have a much more clear and representative metagame. Like, these decks seem very reasonable and not too surprising that they are popular, and we are getting our first look at what the metagame will probably look like more or less for the next couple of weeks, or at least until the next balance changes, which will be in 2 weeks. Anyway, on to the top 5 highest win rate decks. In 5th place, we have the Ionia Ezreal deck. This is slightly below my threshold, actually. Normally, I have set a bar of like 500 games. This is 487 games, but it's close enough, and it's better to take this than take like a deck with a higher sample size, but a massively lower win rate that drops below the like sort of bar of premium win rates, and that's why I chose this. There's also an honorable mention of the Ionia Demacia standalone elusive aggro deck of Swim that came in very close behind this at like, what is it? Let me check. 478 games, so 9 games less, but a win rate of 60.5%. So I didn't include it because I didn't want to push it too much, but technically it's almost at the same level in terms of sample size as this, just barely behind by a few games. So maybe we should expand it to a virtual 6 this week, and then have the elusive aggro actually in first place, because 60.5 is higher than the highest win rate of the decks that meet the sample size bar. So keep that in mind, and you might want to give that a look in the description down below in the sheets to see for yourself. I didn't put it into the top 5 for the mentioned reasons. Alright, next we have Karma Lux. Actually, that's the deck that I meant, not the Ezreal Ionia. The Ezreal Ionia obviously has a high sample size of 1260. My bad for mixing that up, but the Karma Lux deck is the one with the 487. But the win rate, as you can see, is also pretty high, 59.3. So didn't want to like let that drop out because of like 13 games too few technically by the bar that I set, and the bar was more a rough guideline than a super hard order. So maybe I should have included the elusive deck as well and left out the Ezreal decks, because there's a 2% gap here anyway. So yeah, maybe that would have been better. I just tried to not include too many decks that are below the 500 game mark, but maybe in this case it would have made sense. So yeah, Karma Lux is back, so kind of the new old dog on the block. I like this take a lot better than the old Karma Lux decks with like standalone. They were just very like, they had no early game, and they were weird, kind of on the one hand weird standalone monk decks that didn't really do much with it, and then on the other half was this like late game Karma Luck thing, and it just wasn't very coherent as a deck, and it was pretty bad and fell out of favor pretty quickly. This is much more sound of a deck. You have Eye of the Dragon for early game, you have Shadow Assassin and Badger Bear for value and sort of like board presence on 3. Badger Bear also makes single combat a lot better, allowing you to catch up much more on turn 3 if you don't have a play before that. Deep Meditation adds a great card draw to the deck that it didn't have before. And Grizzled Ranger is just a great offense-defense unit. Having a couple more good units also allows you to play Radiant Guardian, which makes your and also makes your remembrances better. And overall makes the deck much more robust and gives it much more of a board presence and much less sort of like incoherent and gimmicky than the old one. So not too surprised it's doing well, but I'm not sure if it is here to stay. We'll see how it will establish itself. But it is certainly better than the old one, which at times was weirdly and very falsely heralded as like the best deck or the deck to play or whatever, when I thought it was always pretty horrible. Can't say that one about this one. This is a very reasonable deck. Still not sure how good it is. I still think it's probably not like anywhere near the best deck or anything, but it is a very solid deck and could be a tier 1 deck, or at least a very good tier 2 deck in the long run probably. But it's too early for me to make any like definitive judgments about it. It certainly cleared up a lot of the flaws and weaknesses of the old variants. Next we have right behind it Bannerman, but in this case it's a Vi splashing version, which has some weird choices, but it has a notably higher win percentage than the regular Bannerman, which only clocks in at around 55.6 at the moment, which is a bit surprising to me, honestly, and I can't say I'm the biggest fan of this version. First of all, Relentless Pursuit doesn't make more sense in this deck than in the other version, just because you have Vi, and it doesn't make any sense in the other version, so I think Relentless Pursuit's pretty bad here. Concerted Strike is neat-ish and helps Vi a bit, but I still think Vi doesn't make it better. I think if you want to play Vi and Bannerman, honestly, I would just take the regular Bannerman and replace Garen with Vi, because Vi doesn't change anything, and Vi is also really good with Unyielding Spirit, which you don't even see here, which doesn't make sense to me either. And the thing is, why I don't like Vi over Garen is Vi's spell is bad. The deck isn't that great at buffing up Vi. Vi is a terrible top deck in a deck like this. If you top deck here and she's like a 2-5 or 3-5, that's notably worse than Garen. Also, Garen levels fairly quick and easy and has nice synergy with single combat. Garen has a really good spell, so getting to free roll Judgment in the deck without actually having the downside of having the clunky situational card Judgment in your deck is amazing between Fiora and Garen, and just how the deck plays is really, really good. So I think Garen is just a much better card in the deck. I honestly don't quite know how the win rate discrepancy comes to be, but to be fair, if we look at the specific Bannerman list that we looked at in the top 5 most played, the discrepancy is not actually big. It's 58.3% versus 59.5%, 59.4%. It's just the overall traditional Bannerman, Fiora, Garen versions that are at 55.6, which means there are worse versions. There are people still playing bad splashes instead of like just Badger Bear, Ranger's Resolve, and Unyielding Spirit. So that actually kind of supports the assumption that this version is just more sound, since the 1-ish% in win rate could just be chalked off to like variance, stuff like that. While, yeah, I think if you want to play Bannerman, stick to the traditional like mono one that we looked at in the most played, even though this is like performing technically better, a bit better by like a bit more than a percent, which is negligible, since just from theory crafting standpoint, this list is much, much worse than the other one. So yeah, there you have my take on that. Where I have well-formed opinions and advice on what you should play, I'll give it, but once again, this is more for the purpose of what to expect to be in your opponent's deck when you face them, and what to face on ladder when you play ladder. Next we have the Corina Control. Not too surprising, 59.6%. It's not just popular, it's also still very good. Who would have thought? Not much to say here. List is the same. If we look at the performances, the list also performs about the same as the archetype. It's 58.59% over 800 games for the total archetype, so 1% difference. Not very noteworthy. And highest win rate deck, and by a lot of people heralded the best or one of the best decks, is the Heimerdinger deck. By Heimerdinger, very popular and even more successful right now, but like I said, I think that will mellow out a bit, so we'll see. And technically, if we would have included the below 500 game Ionia standalone elusive aggro from Swim, it would have clocked in at 60.5% in first place before Heimerdinger. So that is also something to keep in mind and look at if you like that deck. It seems to do pretty well, even though the sample size is lower, which also means there are fewer mirrors, which in other cases of more popular decks usually pull down the win rate a bit, since they can't purge for mirror matches. So a Heimerdinger deck with 60.3% is still probably higher win rate at 2,219 games than the elusive aggro deck at slightly below 500 games, because there will be a lot of mirrors in these stats that probably, if you could purge them, would boost the win rate past the 60.5% of the elusive deck, but that's just guesswork, so we don't know for sure. Anyway, yeah, that's the top 5 most played decks and top 5 highest win rate decks of this week. This looks like a lot more like a new metagame and more reasonable, and we'll see what happens with the next balance patch in 2 weeks. Curious about that. And here a few bonus facts. In terms of master stats, the region distribution, PNZ, 66% of decks or like games played are decks with PNZ, followed by Ionia and Shadow Isles in second place in terms of popularity, followed by Demacia, which is not surprising, especially with mostly mono Demacia actually, and then Noxus at 22%, Bilgewater at 14%, and Freljord at a sad 5%, which honestly is not very surprising to me. Freljord is in a terrible place. I don't think there's a single good Freljord deck. Like, there's Enduring Spiders, which is decent and plays like 6-ish Freljord cards, but that's about it. Like, Freljord is in like real trouble, and I hope we'll see some buffs to Freljord that help mitigate that, because the region is way too far off. Like, there's basically like no reason to play Freljord right now. It should in a way be actively avoided. All right, that's it again for this time. Before you leave, please make sure to check out the sweet NordVPN sponsor deal in the description down below. And if you enjoy the content, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. Leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think. If you have any questions, stuff like that, what you would like me to adjust in the future, what content to bring you guys and stuff like that. And yeah, please consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock or turning off your adblock to help support your favorite content creators on YouTube by watching the ads. Yeah. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm your host, ManuS, and I'll see you next time.